Hi, this is Gregg Tripoli from OHA. Welcome to OHA Stories. I think probably first I should explain my little getup here, but I've been bragging to my colleagues that I've been living in my PJs, and I love my PJs. So they dared me to do this episode in a pair of pajamas, and so I don't usually give in to a dare, but this was an easy one, so this is for my colleagues. At any rate, welcome to OHA Stories. One of the story that I want to tell you today is also one of my favorite stories from the turn of the last century. And it's a story about one of the great entrepreneurs and patriots from our local community named Mary Elizabeth Evans. Mary Elizabeth was born here in Syracuse in 1884 into a family of privilege. Her grandfather was a prominent judge in town, and her father was a professor at Syracuse University. Now, the early deaths of both her father and her grandfather posed a problem for the family, which resulted in a widowed grandmother, widowed mother, and 4 small children, of which Mary Elizabeth was the oldest. They ended up being real estate rich, but cash poor. The real estate market tanked, maintenance costs went sky high, and the family was really destitute. Within a couple of years, they were literally homeless, living in a 2-room cottage that was borrowed and bed bug infested. Mary Elizabeth wanted to do something to help her family. So with the assistance of her Sunday school teacher from May Memorial Church, she decided to start a business from her hobby. And this is really entrepreneurship 101. She started a business from something that she had a passion about, and that was making candy. So she started first by making candy and selling it to clubs and taking orders. The candy was very wholesome and it was excellent candy, so people were very interested in buying. She soon was taking on a lot of orders and couldn't really sell the candy. She was too busy making it. So the local community felt very sorry, obviously, for the Evans family, and they wanted to help this adorable girl who was selling candy to support her family of widows and children. And Gustav Stickley, who is a local furniture maker at the time, decided that he would help, and he made her a cabinet that he installed in the university building here in downtown Syracuse. And Mary Elizabeth, as I said, was too busy making it to sell it, so she put a sign on that cabinet that said, "Open these doors, take what you will, pay cost of goods taken, make your change from my till." And she put a bowl with like $5 or $6 of change in it. The elevator operator kept an eye on it for us so that no one would take advantage. The help yourself honor system of selling made news all across the country. And within a short while, orders for Mary Elizabeth's candy started coming in from all over the nation. Mary Elizabeth sold 16,000 boxes of candy in her first 6 months. So she was well on her way. She started opening little candy shops around. She went to Newport, Rhode Island, and opened a little candy shop there that kind of turned into a tea room where she served tea and some cookies and cakes. The shop in Newport was very popular with some very well-heeled customers with the name of Vanderbilt and Astor and Gould. And these women encouraged Mary Elizabeth to open a shop in New York City. So eventually she did make enough money so that she could invest in a shop in New York City, and she opened on one of the busiest corners of Fifth Avenue in that city. That shop then turned into again a tea room, which turned into a restaurant. And pretty soon she had a string of these going basically from Boston to Bermuda. But the one in Fifth Avenue on New York City really turned into one of the most popular restaurants in that city. She continued to make the candy. The candy operation was stationed here in Syracuse. She hired and employed about more than 200 women all women who were making the candy. The kitchens were known for their immaculate. The women wore white dresses and white aprons, making chocolate. So she was very fastidious, and the chocolate started to take off. Eventually, Mary Elizabeth became very wealthy from the restaurant and candy business. Uh, this was she moved into New York City around 1910. Opened the store there, though, as I said, the manufacturing was still headquartered here in Syracuse. World War I comes along, and Mary Elizabeth wants to do something to help the community. She's also worried about food rationing. Obviously, she's in the candy business, and sugar is likely one of those foodstuffs that is to be rationed. So she travels to Washington, D.C. to meet with Herbert Hoover. Now, before he was president of the United States, Herbert Hoover was the U.S. Food Administrator. And he said that Mary Elizabeth is the only person who actually brought him a very constructive idea. At first, he was concerned because Mary Elizabeth was rather famous at the time. She was in all the papers as the youngest businesswoman in the country. And he was afraid that she wanted more than her fair share of sugar and different foods that would go into the candy making. But she surprised him because she wanted to do something just the opposite. She wanted to know what foods he would ration so that she could come up with substitutes. And their collaboration actually resulted in a book that Mary Elizabeth wrote called Wartime Recipes. It became a bestseller. It was really reissued in World War II as well. But in that book, she substituted non-rationed ingredients for rationed ingredients so that Americans could continue to make their favorite meals and still contribute to the war effort. Not only that, she actually funded from her own pocket and led a major Red Cross and food distribution effort in Paris. She went right to Paris for the soldiers, U.S. soldiers that were stationed there. And she really ran the food distribution for them. Now, this is important because those soldiers were eating 4,000 calorie a day diets, and every speck of that food had to be shipped from the United States. So it was a major logistical issue. Very organized and knew how to run a company. Mary Elizabeth excelled. She found out that despite all of the food that they were eating and all the calories, that the soldiers really lacked sweets and wanted sweets. So she took over an old abandoned hotel kitchen in Paris and turned it into a confectionery. And she made candy and cupcakes and cookies to give the soldiers there a taste of home. She actually stayed on through the war and after for a little bit to help a couple local restaurants get back on their feet after the war, and then she returned to America to continue to run her businesses. Mary Elizabeth married late in life. She married a very wealthy businessman from Providence, Rhode Island, and then eventually moved to Providence. She became the grand dame of Providence and was, by this time, very philanthropic. She was a major supporter of the arts and music and historic preservation. She also got very interested in landscape architecture. She's really responsible for the entire landscape plan of Brown University, and she started a program to help plant trees and in the town of Providence. She also took over an old scrap metal yard at the head of Narragansett Bay and turned it into a park, which is a very, very popular and famous park today in Providence called India Point Park. Now, her restaurants were doing very well, but Mary Elizabeth had a child when she was 40, and she wanted to stay home more and take care of her son and her husband. So Mary Elizabeth gave all of her interest in the business and the restaurants to her sister. Her sister actually then raised two generations of family on that restaurant. They closed the restaurants outside of New York City and kept the restaurant in New York City. That restaurant actually stayed open under the name Mary Elizabeth's until 1985, which is ironically the year that Mary Elizabeth passed away at 100 years of age. But in the process of that restaurant, she had a bakery. That bakery made the desserts for the restaurant, but it also had a takeout business where she sold some cakes and cookies and a donut. Only one donut, a cruller, a French-style cruller. Now, in 1976, the New York Magazine had a competition to find the best donut in New York City. And they canvassed all the donut shops and the bakeries and did a taste test. And Mary Elizabeth's cruller won as the #1 donut in New York City. A few years later, the New York Times had a similar competition to find the best donut in New York City. And who won again? Mary Elizabeth's cruller. Mary Elizabeth sold 250 dozen crullers a day out of that restaurant bakery in New York City. That recipe is now being recreated right here in Syracuse by Glazed and Confused. When the shutdown is over, they will begin manufacturing Mary Elizabeth's cruller again. So look for it every Throwback Thursday. You can buy the Mary Elizabeth cruller at Glazed and Confused. Mary Elizabeth's story is really an amazing story of a young girl who pulled herself up from the bootstraps and started a business that really made her an exceptionally wealthy woman. But what's more important than that is she also gave back. She remembered when the community came together to help her, and she felt that it was time to pay it forward. And she did that with her philanthropy and became a major philanthropist for many, many organizations. Mary Elizabeth's story is an important story about entrepreneurship, and it is featured in a new book by award-winning author Eric Schultz. In fact, he gives Mary Elizabeth her own chapter in this book. It's called Innovation on Tap, Stories of Entrepreneurship from the Cotton Gin to Broadway's Hamilton. And it's filled with amazing stories of entrepreneurs. Some of them are very famous and well-known, but many of them are incredible people like Mary Elizabeth who aren't that well-known, but who did fantastic jobs with building businesses or process innovation where they took an idea and made it better and cheaper and faster. So I encourage you to look for Mary Elizabeth's cruller every Throwback Thursday after the shutdown is over with Glazed and Confused. And you can order this book online through our store, Innovation on Tap. I highly recommend it. It's a great book, and we're thrilled that Eric decided to feature Mary Elizabeth in that story. So thanks for joining me with another great story from our local history for OHA Stories. I look forward to seeing you again next time, when maybe I'll wear a different set of pajamas. You never know. Thanks.